My dad and I are avid campers. We're not professionals, but my dad did used to be a wilderness guide for kids. We usually prefer the eastern and western Sierras because they have great car camping spots next to lakes. They also have a lot of great trails. Last summer, we decided to go up for a 2-night stay and do some day hiking. The campground was pretty full, but that wasn't unusual for the summer. But we were lucky enough to find a pretty secluded site. The first night was normal. There was a little bear activity, but we're used to that. The second night, I crawled into my backpacking tent and I passed out cold. I slept until about 3 a.m. when I woke up to the sound of footsteps. My dad is a diabetic and needs to get up to go to the bathroom around 3 or 4 times a night. So I thought it was him. I mean, the sounds definitely sounded like footsteps, but they were coming from the wrong direction. We were located next to the bathrooms, so the footsteps should be moving in that direction. Instead, they're coming closer to my tent. They stopped about a yard short. I brushed it off as it being my dad. Maybe he was lost without a flashlight. And then I heard breathing. Next to my tent. Right above it. I lay perfectly still, but the footsteps continued to circle my tent. There was a new moon and it was pitch black out, so I couldn't see anything through the tent. Now, I'm a heavy sleeper, so I convinced myself, or tried to, that I was just dreaming. And then I felt a single finger run the length of my foot through the tent. Real slow, methodical. Now I figured I had to be dreaming because my foot was in my sleeping bag. I couldn't possibly feel anybody rubbing it. But whatever it was stroked my foot for a minute or two, breathing deeply. I laid frozen as whatever it was stroked my foot for a minute or two, and then left. I stayed up the rest of the night. In the morning, I heard my dad get out of his tent. I bolted up and met him by the fire. He looked me in the eye and asked if I had gotten up the night before. I asked him the same, and he said he had it around 2 a.m. because he thought someone was going through our stuff. As I told him my story, we noticed our gear had been neatly rearranged on the table. Every item. Nothing was taken. There were footprints in a perfect circle around my tent. To this day, we still can't talk about it. I'm a park ranger. Another ranger and I were out on a search and rescue call once. The missing person was a man in his 20s. He had gone hiking and hadn't returned the day that he intended to. When we got the call, it was nighttime, but we hiked in a few miles and set up camp on a ridge that had a pretty good view. The missing person had gone into the woods prepared, so we decided to wait until daylight before beginning the search. About 2 a.m., I got up and took a piss when I saw a moving light at the base of the cliffs across the valley, a few miles away. It looked like a flashlight beam. I told the other ranger, but we decided to just wait for daylight. The next morning, we decided to go check out the area where I saw the light and bring this guy home. We got to approximately where I saw the light the night before, and we started calling his name. We soon found his body at the base of the cliff. He had fallen 60 feet onto his head. The body was badly mangled. 20 feet from the man's body was the guy's mag light. It seemed odd, but I thought nothing of it until the other ranger reminded me of the light the night before. Kind of gave me the creeps, but I still dismissed it. Before too long, the coroner arrived and inspected the body. After he took the body back to the lab, he said that the man had been dead for at least 48 hours before we found the body. That couldn't be possible. I saw the light. But he was already dead? Where had the light come from? Other hikers? To this day, I have no clue what I saw that night. My dad and I would occasionally go hunting together when I was a kid. I was 14 and my dad knew a guy who owned what seemed to be half of Georgia. I mean, the amount of property this guy owned was ridiculous. He let people hunt out there, and if he trusted you, he let you camp out there for a couple of nights. He'd always make sure we had a way to call for help, though. I loved camping out there more than I did just going hunting for a few hours and going home. I liked the woodsman feel of living out in the woods. So this one time we woke up early one morning and hiked into the woods. It was still dark when we got to our stand. We didn't see or hear anything, not even birds. I remember my dad commenting on it, and looking back, it should have been a sign. Frustrated, we packed up and looked for a spot to camp. My dad suggested we go deeper into the woods to better our chances of seeing something, so that's what we did. We hiked for a few hours, found a clearing, set up a small camp. We got settled and passed the time, freaking ourselves out by talking about Bigfoot and other woodland creatures. We hiked a ways away from camp, set up our blind, and waited. Again, nothing. We got back to our camp and we saw our tent had been pulled up and laid flat. Not in a neat way, but it just kind of laid there. We thought it was just the wind or something, and maybe we didn't even put it upright. Maybe it just collapsed. We didn't think much of it. Since we didn't see or even hear anything all day, we decided to leave the following day and try again later that week. We settled in for the night, built a really small fire, and we just relaxed. Again, there were no birds making any sounds. I remember thinking how odd it was to be this deep into the woods and only hear one, maybe two birds the entire trip. We eventually went to sleep. It was pitch black, middle of the night. I woke up for some reason. I was in that half sleep, half wake phase. I heard laughter. I jolted awake and didn't hear it again. I figured it was just a dream. I laid back down and a few minutes later, I heard it again. The laughter continued, and it got pretty loud. I got up and I saw my dad was up too. He whispered to me, "Did you hear that?" My heart dropped. He heard the laughing too. It wasn't a dream. We heard it again, but it was faint. It sounded like several people laughing in unison. It wasn't cackling or hysterical laughter, but just kind of normal laughter. It didn't last but for maybe 5 or 6 seconds. Still, I have never felt that much fear before in my entire life. We didn't hear it anymore after that, but needless to say, we didn't get any sleep. As soon as the sun came up, we packed up and left. My dad was convinced someone followed us and was playing a prank. He said while we were in the stand and blind that whoever it was scaring the wildlife off with their unmasked scent. Yeah, he said this, but he didn't go back out there for over a month. When we finally did go back, he mentioned it to the guy who owned the property. The guy wouldn't let my dad hunt there anymore. Didn't say why either. I guess it's possible for someone to have followed us out there, but they must have been legitimate ninjas. We didn't see or hear anybody. There were dead leaves and sticks everywhere. We would have heard somebody. And when whoever decided to laugh, It came from different spots around us, and I never heard one footstep. I've always been drawn to the wild. It seems like home, and I generally know my neighbors out there. I'm not afraid to be in the deep woods, in the dark. I love my woods. One sunny weekday afternoon, I dirt biked up an old mining road. I gained a couple thousand feet from the valley floor towards one of the ridges of the Cascades. When the road gave out near the bottom of a high basin, I put on my backpack and started off cross-country toward the ridge. It was heavily forested. Old growth, old cut, fading in another 1,000 feet into those scraggly, wind-blown ones near the top. About 20 minutes in, about a half a mile up, near the tree line, I heard this thumping sound. It was very odd, so I stopped to listen carefully. It sounded like a big, solid branch was being whacked against a solid tree. I use the term solid because the hits were powerful. One or both of the pieces of wood were hard and dry. The wood resonated and rang on impact as dry wood will. I couldn't get over the power though. It sounded like someone was swinging a 4-inch post. The thumping had a very complex and well-defined pattern. It sounded very rapid, like what a drummer would do if they were messing around with a stick, but I swear it sounded like a 4-inch post was being treated as lightly as a drumstick. I listened for maybe 5 minutes, just fascinated with this sound, this code, and the power of it. Then the drumming suddenly stopped. I kind of woke up to the fear of this unknown thing out there. I had my pistol, my bear spray, and my knife. Still, this silence scared me. It seemed loaded. I turned around and left the valley. That place and that experience gave me chills. I'll never go there again. I've read stories about some of the native peoples around here having valleys that they just would not go into. I can understand now how those legends got started.